She walks into the bakery, expecting a warm welcome, but instead, she's coldly turned away without a word. Just moments later, an unexpected twist unfolds. An undercover boss walks in. What happens next will shock you. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to us and inspires us to create even more engaging content. Thank you. David Parker had always considered himself an average man with an unremarkable job. He worked as a senior investigator at a medium-sized financial firm in New York, handling routine audits and investigations into employee behavior. Though his work was necessary, it was never particularly exciting. Still, he found satisfaction in knowing he was good at what he did, and that his efforts contributed to keeping things running smoothly. Life was simple, until one phone call disrupted everything. The call came unexpectedly on a Wednesday afternoon. It was from a well-known executive at the firm, Eric Sullivan. Eric, with his polished demeanor and sharp suit, was someone David had never interacted with much. Yet, the invitation he extended was too intriguing to ignore. David, Eric had said, his voice warm but purposeful, "I'd like to bring you in on a new project. Something big, something that could really put you on the map. Let's meet tomorrow." David's heart raced a little as he considered the possibility of a breakthrough in his career. He was told to meet Eric at a nearby cafe, a place where only the top brass met. The chance to be part of something significant was exactly what he'd been waiting for. He hung up, his mind swirling with excitement. This could be it, his big break. The next day, he arrived at the cafe, a little early, eager to impress. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and the soft murmur of conversation added to the cozy atmosphere. When Eric walked in, David stood to greet him, offering a smile. They exchanged pleasantries before Eric dove into the reason for the meeting. "David, you've been doing great work. We've got a situation on our hands, an issue that needs someone like you. We need someone we can trust to take on a confidential investigation. There's a new project underway, and we want you to lead it." Eric's words were like music to David's ears. A confidential investigation? Leading the charge on a high-profile project? This was everything David had dreamed of. He could feel his pulse quicken, his thoughts racing with all the possibilities. He tried to hide his enthusiasm, but it was clear he was on the edge of his seat. The details were vague, but Eric assured him it would all become clear soon. They would meet again in a week to discuss further. But David couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like a shadow lurking just out of sight. Eric's words, though welcoming, had an edge to them, a sense of urgency that made David's gut tighten. As the days passed, David's thoughts kept circling back to the meeting. There were small, unsettling details that started to nag at him. One evening, as he was reviewing some files, he caught the reflection of someone watching him from the hallway. It was brief, just a fleeting glance, but it set his nerves on edge. The next day, a file he had been working on went missing. At first, he thought it was a mistake, maybe just a mix-up, but the feeling of unease continued to grow. Then came the most disturbing moment yet. David received a phone call late one night. The voice on the other end was distorted, low, and menacing. "You don't know what you're getting into, do you?" the voice warned. "Stay away, David. If you value your career, your life, stay away from this project." His heart pounded in his chest as he held the phone, staring at the screen as if it might provide some explanation. But there was no clarity, no reason for the threat. Was it someone from the firm trying to scare him off? Or worse, was it a warning from someone within the company who knew more than he did? The next day, he came into the office to find that an important report he'd been tracking for days had disappeared. Not only that, but his colleague, Laura, whom he'd been working closely with, had vanished. No one knew where she had gone, and no one was willing to explain. It was as if she had been erased from the office entirely. David sat at his desk, the weight of the situation pressing on him. He'd been pulled into something much larger than he could have ever imagined. He thought back to Eric's invitation, the promises of a big opportunity, and he began to wonder, had he been lured into a trap? What was the real agenda behind this mysterious project? And more importantly, who was behind it? The seed of doubt had been planted, and David knew that to get to the bottom of this, He'd have to dive deeper than he ever had before. David had always trusted the structure of his workplace. It was a system he knew well, and despite its flaws, it was reliable. But something had started to feel off ever since that initial meeting with Eric Sullivan. At first, the project seemed like a golden opportunity. But as the days passed, there were small, unsettling signs that David couldn't ignore. The first sign came when he noticed Eric's demeanor change. It wasn't an overt change, but there was something in the way Eric spoke that made David uneasy. The calm assurance was still there, but there was an edge, a layer of something hidden beneath the surface. During one of their later meetings, Eric had brushed aside a critical issue that David had brought up, saying, "Don't worry about it, we've got it covered. Focus on your role, David." That wasn't like Eric. He was always methodical, always took every detail into account. David couldn't shake the feeling that Eric was glossing over something important. When he tried to follow up, the responses became more vague, and the meetings felt more rehearsed. There was no clear direction, just a lot of empty words. This was when David's instincts told him that something was wrong. The investigation that had seemed like a straightforward opportunity was beginning to show cracks. He knew it wasn't just Eric, there was something deeper, something more hidden. He began digging. David started reaching out to his colleagues who had been around longer, those who had seen the inner workings of the company for years. He talked to those who had been let go recently, those whose dismissals had seemed odd or premature. It wasn't long before David started uncovering discrepancies in the information coming from the top. The company's financial reports weren't matching up with reality. Internal meetings about upcoming projects were becoming increasingly opaque. Decisions that seemed to make no sense began to pile up, and David's frustration grew. He reviewed one particular report, a financial summary that was supposed to show a surplus. But the numbers didn't add up. There were inconsistencies, missing figures, and unexplained allocations. David's heart sank as he pieced together the information. This wasn't a simple mistake or oversight, it was manipulation. There was someone pulling strings, controlling the flow of information. And it wasn't just Eric. David's suspicions began to focus on someone else, an unknown entity pulling the strings behind the scenes. He hadn't seen them yet, but it was becoming increasingly clear that a hidden power within the company was controlling things. David was certain now that this wasn't just a misunderstanding or a simple oversight, it was a deliberate act of concealment. He spent the next few days meticulously gathering evidence. He tracked down confidential documents, pored over emails that had been deleted, and even used connections to gain access to secret meetings. He had a few key pieces of the puzzle, but something still felt off. Each document he uncovered led him closer to a powerful network of people with far-reaching influence. But just as he thought he was close to connecting the dots, the unthinkable happened. The document he had uncovered, the one that could prove the company's financial misconduct, vanished from his desk. It was as if it had never been there. A sense of panic swept over him. Had someone found out what he was doing? Had they gotten to it before he could use it? Desperation set in. David knew he couldn't stop now. But as he scrambled to gather more information, an unexpected ally appeared. A former colleague, Michael, who had been working in the background for years, approached David in secret. He whispered in a low, hurried voice, "David, you've been watched. They know what you're doing." Michael's face was pale, and his hands trembled. Before David could ask any questions, Michael turned and vanished as quickly as he had appeared. It was a warning, a sign that David's every move was being monitored. David's heart raced as he sat there, stunned. The world around him felt like it was closing in. He had to move quickly. But now he realized that every step he took was being observed. Who could he trust? Who was really on his side in this dangerous game? The clock was ticking, and David's resolve hardened. He was in too deep now. There was no turning back. The truth had to be exposed, even if it meant facing down the powerful forces that were pulling the strings behind the scenes. David Parker's instincts were sharp, and they were screaming at him to dig deeper. After the unsettling phone call and the missing evidence, his suspicion grew that the game he was in was far bigger than he had imagined. He couldn't let go. Every instinct in his body told him he was right. And the truth, however dark, was there, buried in the heart of the company. He had to continue, no matter the cost. So, David decided to move in silence, keeping his investigation under wraps. He couldn't trust anyone, not after everything that had happened. Not even the colleagues who seemed friendly or the superiors who pretended to be concerned. He needed to operate alone, quietly, in the shadows. David started by working around the clock, analyzing old reports and audits in a way that would have seemed normal to anyone looking over his shoulder. He spent countless hours reviewing files, digging into the inconsistencies he had noticed before, all while pretending that nothing was amiss. But he knew it wasn't just the documents he had to worry about. It was the people. He began to quietly meet with employees who had been dismissed recently. Individuals who had seen too much. Or people who, for one reason or another, had been silenced. The risk of approaching them was real, too real for comfort, but these were the people who knew what was happening behind closed doors. He met them in out-of-sight corners of coffee shops, in dimly lit offices late at night. He asked pointed questions, hoping they would share whatever scraps of information they had left. Some of them were hesitant, afraid to speak out, but they couldn't hold back forever. And when they finally opened up, David began to piece together a web of lies and manipulations. Reports didn't match, financial statements were doctored, conversations had been misrepresented in board meetings. It was all beginning to add up in a way that painted a horrifying picture. Someone was pulling the strings. And it wasn't just Eric Sullivan. Then, just as David thought he was getting somewhere, someone unexpected appeared. Michelle, a former employee of the company who had worked as a senior analyst, made her way into his life. She reached out to him with caution, her voice laced with unease when she asked for a meeting. David agreed, though he wasn't sure what to expect. In their quiet meeting at a small diner, Michelle slid a manila folder across the table to him. "This is everything I've got. You need to be careful. There are people watching. If you go any further, they'll be onto you." Her words hung heavy in the air, warning him of dangers she wasn't able to name directly. She had been a part of the team for years, and her warnings felt real. She was scared. She told him everything she knew, revealing more about the shadowy dealings she had witnessed from her position within the company. But she had her limits. There were names she couldn't share, a line she wouldn't cross for fear of losing everything. Her warning echoed in David's mind long after they parted ways. He knew he had to press on, but now he also knew the stakes were higher than he had originally thought. Someone, or something, was making sure this investigation wouldn't succeed. Michelle was right to be scared, but David couldn't afford to be. Not now. David's next steps took him into unfamiliar territory within the company. He began sneaking into departments that were usually off limits, specifically the financial offices and archives where sensitive documents were kept. These were places most employees had no reason to enter. But David wasn't most employees anymore. He wasn't just an investigator, he was now a man on a mission. One that might cost him everything. One night, after hours, David found a storage room in the basement of the building. It was cold, the faint hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. Inside, there were piles of papers. Boxes filled with documents, some stacked neatly, others thrown haphazardly. It was the perfect place to hide things. He searched quickly but methodically, his fingers brushing over documents, pulling out files that looked out of place. His eyes narrowed when he uncovered a folder with a series of unauthorized transactions, large sums of money flowing between companies that shouldn't have been connected. It was the kind of thing he had been looking for. The smoking gun that could bring the whole operation down. But just as he was about to pull the folder from the pile, a noise made him freeze. He heard a soft footstep behind him, followed by the creak of a door. Someone had been watching. Someone knew exactly where he was and what he was doing. David quickly shoved the file back into the box and hid, hoping the intruder hadn't seen him. His heart raced as he listened to the footsteps drawing nearer. His breath caught in his throat. Was it just a janitor? A security guard? Or someone sent to ensure he didn't find what he was looking for? The footsteps stopped right next to the pile where he was hiding. David held his breath, willing himself to remain silent. The tension in the air was palpable, as if time itself had frozen. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the sound of footsteps retreated. The door clicked shut. David waited a moment longer before stepping out of his hiding place. He had been caught. Whoever had been watching him was still out there, and they knew exactly what he was up to. His hands shook as he gathered the papers and prepared to leave. This was getting dangerous, much more dangerous than he had ever expected. David's mind raced as he made his way out of the building. Every instinct telling him that he was walking on the edge of something far more perilous than a simple corporate investigation. The shadows were closing in, and now he couldn't stop. Not now. David sat alone in his office, the weight of the situation pressing down on him more than ever. His instincts were on edge, his body tense. It had been a few days since the discovery of the hidden files. And despite his best efforts to cover his tracks, he knew he was being watched. His every move felt scrutinized, and the feeling of paranoia gnawed at him, especially after the threats he'd received. The morning's meeting had only added to his anxiety. He had been summoned by his superior, Sandra Mulligan, for a routine check-in, or so it seemed, but as soon as he stepped into her office, he was hit with a wave of harsh words and reproach. Sandra, usually calm and composed, looked agitated. "David, I've heard some disturbing things about your recent behavior," she said, her tone cold and dismissive. "You've been poking around in things that are none of your concern. This isn't what we stand for here." David's throat tightened, but he kept his composure. "I'm just trying to do my job," he replied, but Sandra wasn't having it. "You've been asking too many questions, digging into areas that don't concern you. That's not how things work here," Sandra continued, her eyes narrowing with a touch of suspicion. "I think you need to take a step back before you jeopardize your position." Her words struck like a slap, the tension in the room thickening with every sentence. David could feel the walls closing in around him. It wasn't just Sandra's harsh reprimand, it was the subtle implication that he was being watched. The rumors of his so-called suspicious activities had already begun to spread, tainting his reputation within the company. People were talking, and none of it was good. Leaving Sandra's office, David couldn't shake the heavy feeling of isolation. The whispers, the sideways glances, and the veiled threats, it was all becoming too much to handle. He was still reeling from the weight of the morning's meeting when his phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with an unexpected message. It was from Michelle, a former colleague who had been fired months earlier. The message was brief but urgent. "We need to talk. Meet me at the usual place." "It's bad." David's heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly where she meant, the old diner at the corner of 6th and West. It had been their quiet escape, a neutral ground to exchange information. He didn't waste a moment. He grabbed his coat and headed out. When David arrived, Michelle was already there, sitting in a booth near the back, her face hidden in the shadows. He slid into the seat across from her. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder before speaking in a low voice. "You're not the only one asking questions," she whispered. "I've been looking into things myself. And let me tell you, the deeper you dig, the more dangerous it gets. They're watching you, David, everyone. It's not just Eric, it's bigger." David's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? What have you found?" Michelle hesitated for a moment, as if weighing the risks of what she was about to say. Then, her voice dropped lower. "If possible, there's a whole network running things behind the scenes. It's not just the financial manipulation, it's everything. The company's not what it seems. I found out they've been funneling money through shell companies, hiding assets, setting up deals that never see the light of day. And Eric? He's not the mastermind, he's just a pawn." David was taken aback. The pieces were starting to fall into place. But it was so much bigger than he had imagined. There were layers upon layers of corruption. And David had stumbled upon something that could bring it all crashing down. But the risks were becoming clearer. "Michelle, I need more. I can't back off now. But I don't know who I can trust," David said, his voice tight with frustration. She nodded, her eyes darting nervously. "Be careful, David. They know you're onto them. I've seen them watching, and you're not the only one who's been in their sights." David stood up, a sense of urgency building in him. He had to act, and soon. He couldn't keep waiting for the right moment to strike. He needed to expose this. But the stakes were higher than ever. If they were onto him, he had no time to lose. Cautiously, he and Michelle began to discuss the next steps. They decided to take the risk and go public. There was no turning back now. David would need to gather his evidence, find a way to get it into the right hands. and get it out to the press. They made their plans to contact a few trusted journalists who might be able to help. But as they continued to speak, a chilling realization set in. This wasn't just about uncovering a few bad decisions. It was about taking down a system that had been rigged from the inside. They set a time to meet again. But as David left the diner, a knot tightened in his stomach. Something wasn't right. He couldn't shake the feeling that their plan was already compromised. That night, David sat down at his desk, the weight of the entire investigation on his shoulders. He pulled up the draft of the email he planned to send to the press, detailing everything he had discovered so far. But just as he was about to hit send, something caught his eye. His screen flickered. The email disappeared. David's heart dropped. He quickly checked his sent folder. It was gone. Not just the email, but everything he had worked on. The evidence, the documents, the hours of research. He stood up, his pulse racing. He ran to his file cabinet and opened it. Searching through the papers, the files were all gone. Just like that, vanished. Someone had hacked him. Someone had known exactly what he was planning. The feeling of being cornered hit him like a freight train. His own company had sabotaged him. He was exposed. Every step he had taken, every piece of evidence, every lead, gone. And then, a new realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. They knew. The company, the ones pulling the strings, they knew exactly what he was doing. David's options were narrowing quickly. He had to make a decision, continue to push forward and risk everything, or walk away and live to fight another day. The air in the conference room felt thick with tension. David Parker watched as the company's upper management, including the ever-elusive Eric Sullivan, prepared for what was supposed to be a grand unveiling. This wasn't just any regular press conference, it was a meticulously orchestrated event designed to bolster the company's image. Eric stood at the podium, his demeanor cold and controlled, the picture of confidence. The audience watched in rapt attention as he spoke about the company's record profits and groundbreaking new initiatives, never once hinting at the shadows lurking beneath. David knew better. The words that flowed from Eric's lips were nothing more than a smokescreen, a polished facade meant to distract from the true nature of what was happening inside the company. Eric had finally made his move, no longer hiding behind a veil of subtlety but standing in the spotlight, claiming his power openly. The event had been carefully designed not just to show off the company's successes but to secure Eric's position at the top. But David wasn't fooled. This public spectacle was a response to the growing threats to his control, and he could feel the weight of it in the pit of his stomach. Eric had known for some time that David was on his tail. And now, the stage was set for a far more dangerous game. The power struggle was no longer just a battle for information, it had escalated to a battle for survival. As the speeches concluded, David stood off to the side, his eyes scanning the room. Everything had been meticulously planned. Yet, there was something about this event that sent a chill down his spine. The way people looked at him now had changed. There was a shift in the air, and David knew he was no longer just an investigator, he had become the hunted. David tried to keep his emotions in check, but as he made his way through the crowd, a voice cut through the noise. It was Eric, his words laced with a sickening sweetness. "David," Eric said, his eyes locking with David's in a way that felt far too deliberate. "I'm glad you could make it. We need to talk. Let's catch up in my office. It's time we took the next step. Don't you think?" David's heart skipped a beat. He had been expecting this moment. But now that it was here, he felt a cold rush of fear. What did Eric want? A deal? An ultimatum? Or perhaps something more sinister? David followed Eric through the back hallways, where the corporate machinery hummed with a quiet efficiency. They reached Eric's office, and David stepped inside. The room was plush, filled with rich wood and leather, a space that screamed power and control. Eric motioned for David to sit. "I'm sure you've realized by now that things have gotten complicated." Eric began, his voice calm but carrying a weight of finality. "Your investigation, David, it's been impressive, but it's also been disruptive. And that's not something I can allow." David's pulse quickened. He had been expecting something like this, an attempt to shut him down. But what was Eric's play? "I know what you're trying to do, Eric," David replied, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "And I know it's not just about the company. You're hiding something far bigger. I won't stop until the truth comes out. Eric chuckled, a dark laugh that filled the room with an unsettling chill. Oh, I know you won't. That's why I've been keeping an eye on you. I admire your persistence. Really. But here's the thing. I'm offering you a choice. David, join me. Help us shape the future of this company. Be part of something bigger. You'll have power, influence, everything you've always wanted. David stared at him, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on his chest. Eric was offering him a way out, a chance to stop the fight and align himself with the very people he had been trying to expose. It was a tempting offer, but David knew it for what it was, bait, designed to reel him in and strip him of his integrity. I don't need your power, Eric, David said, his voice cutting through the tension. I just want the truth. Eric's smile faltered for a moment, his eyes darkening. You're making a mistake, David. I'm giving you an opportunity, and you're turning it down. Let me be clear, if you refuse, you will be silenced. You'll disappear, just like the others. David stood up, his mind racing. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. He was being cornered. Eric's words were more than threats, they were a warning. A sign that he was no longer just fighting for the truth, he was fighting for his life. Before David could say anything else, a voice interrupted. It was someone he didn't expect to see, Randy, a colleague he'd worked closely with for years. Randy, the man who had always been loyal, always supported David in his investigations. Or so David had thought. David, Randy said, stepping into the room with a confident air. I'm afraid Eric's right. You've gone too far this time. It's time to step back. David froze. Randy? What was happening? Randy had been his ally, someone he trusted, but now, standing there in front of him, Randy seemed like a completely different person. You? David's voice cracked, his disbelief palpable. You're with him? Randy looked at David with a mix of pity and calculation. I never wanted it to come to this. But you've forced my hand. It's over. David, we're all part of this system. You can't win. David's heart sank. The man he had counted on, the man he had shared secrets with, had betrayed him. Randy's words were like a blow to the gut, confirming his worst fear. No one in the company could be trusted. Not anymore. David was left standing there, reeling from the betrayal. The reality of the situation was settling in. Eric had orchestrated this. Randy had played his part. And now, David was alone, with the walls closing in around him. As the conversation ended and David left the office, his mind was spinning. He was at a crossroads, facing an impossible choice. Expose the truth and risk everything, or join the very people he had been fighting against and live in the shadows. David walked through the halls of the company, his footsteps echoing with a weight that was heavier than ever. It felt like the walls were closing in. After everything that had transpired, his investigation, the mounting threats, the betrayal, it seemed like everything he had fought for was slipping through his fingers. The company had officially suspended him from his duties, and the smear campaign had begun. Rumors spread like wildfire, distorting the truth, painting him as a traitor, a rogue element in the organization. It was hard to believe how quickly everything had unraveled. Just days ago, he had been a respected member of the team, trusted by his colleagues. Now, he was a pariah. The walls that once seemed supportive had turned into cold barriers, locking him out of any chance of redemption within the company. To make matters worse, C6, the ally who had stood by him, had been fired. Arrested, or worse, David wasn't sure. The shock of losing his only remaining ally was a blow he couldn't fully process. He had trusted C6 with everything, and now, without them, he felt like he was fighting this battle alone. He stared at the documents in front of him, desperately searching for anything that could help him piece together the truth. His mind raced as he recalled the last few weeks, the small victories, the tiny glimpses of progress, and how it all seemed to fall apart in an instant. The sense of betrayal was a sharp edge digging into his chest. And for a moment, he wasn't sure if he could keep going. But then he saw it. A document, partially hidden beneath a pile of files. A printout from a meeting that had happened months ago. It was a financial report, one that seemed innocuous at first glance. But something about it felt off. He picked it up and read through it quickly, his pulse quickening with every line. It was the proof he needed. The missing link to the conspiracy. It was undeniable. But there was one problem: he had no idea where it came from. No clue who had hidden it or where it had been kept. He was certain that whoever had left it there, whoever had thought they were keeping it from him, was watching his every move. He wasn't safe. Not anymore. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, harsh knock on the door. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He'd been expecting this visit for days. "David, we need to talk," said Sandra Mulligan, her voice cold and unyielding. "It's time you faced the consequences." She entered the office with the same calculating look she had always had. The one that always made him feel like she knew more than she let on. She had been behind the scenes of everything, and David could feel the weight of her presence more than ever now. "You've caused enough trouble. You're done," she continued, her tone venomous. "This company doesn't need people like you. You've been nothing but a thorn in our side." David looked up at her, a cold fury settling in his chest. He had expected her to turn on him, but hearing it aloud still stung. "You don't understand," David said, his voice steady despite the rush of anger building inside him. "This isn't about me. It's about what you've done to everyone in this company. You're hiding something, and I won't stop until I expose it." Sandra's lips twisted into a smirk. "You're deluded, David. No one cares about your little crusade. You're out, and you're not coming back in. Do you understand?" David stared her down, his mind working quickly. He had no choice now but to finish what he started. The company had made its move, but he would make his, no matter the cost. As Sandra left the room, the reality of his situation hit him like a freight train. He had been suspended, his career destroyed, and yet he still had something to fight for, this shred of evidence. This one final piece of the puzzle. He would need to take it to the press. But that would be dangerous. And even if he did, would anyone believe him? After all, they had already spun the story to fit their narrative. The walls were closing in. But David refused to back down. He had to find a way to get the evidence into the right hands. His mind raced with possibilities as he thought about the next steps. But one thing was certain: he wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he had been avoiding. The line clicked, and a voice on the other end answered. "David?" It was Michelle. "What's going on? Are you okay?" David closed his eyes, letting out a deep breath. "We're not done yet. I need your help. It's time to take this to the next level." But as he hung up the phone, his gut twisted with unease. Something wasn't right. Someone knew what he was planning. Someone was watching. As he walked to his office window, looking out at the city beyond, he couldn't shake the feeling that the next move was already being set in motion. This game wasn't just about him anymore. It was about power, and he was about to make the ultimate move. David stood outside the small cafe, staring at the screen of his phone. His heart was racing. The weight of everything that had happened so far, the betrayal, the loss, the lies, had almost crushed him. But now, standing there, he knew it was time to rebuild. He had to. The pieces of the puzzle were still scattered, and he wasn't going to stop until he put them together. After the chaos, he had lost everything. His colleagues, the ones he had trusted, had turned their backs on him. But David wasn't about to let it end like that. He started reaching out to old friends. People who owed him favors. People who knew how the game was really played. Journalists, lawyers, and hackers. Anyone who could help him uncover the truth. One by one, they started responding. Each of them agreed to meet. Each with their own reasons. Their own motivations. David was building a new network. And it was a risky move. But he had no choice. He couldn't go back to his old life. Not after what he had seen. He met with a journalist, Peter, who had contacts within some of the higher-ups at the company. Peter was hesitant at first, wary of the dangers involved. But after hearing the details of David's investigation, he agreed to help. Peter had sources who could access information that David couldn't even dream of reaching on his own. And then there was Sarah, the hacker, who had been following the digital trail of C3 for years. Sarah was dangerous, but she was also the best chance David had. She could break into systems that were thought to be impenetrable. David couldn't risk walking through the front door anymore. He had to go around the system, find new ways to get inside. Peter and Sarah became his lifeline, the ones who could get him what he needed. They created a plan to infiltrate the company's network, to find the documents C3 had buried, To find the proof that could bring it all down. The plan wasn't without its dangers. Every step felt like walking through a minefield. They had to be careful, quiet, and quick. If C3 caught wind of what they were doing, it could all be over before it even started. But David didn't have the luxury of playing it safe anymore. As they put the plan into action, David felt the weight of his decision press down on him. It wasn't just the fear of getting caught, it was the fear of losing everything. The cost of failure was higher than ever. He could lose his job, his reputation, and his freedom. But if he backed down now, the truth would never come to light. The lies would continue, and nothing would ever change. He spent sleepless nights, his mind racing with possibilities and dangers. His thoughts were a whirlwind of uncertainty and determination. The stakes had never been higher. And yet there was no turning back. He had come too far to stop now. Then, as if the universe had sensed his resolve, a twist came. He had just received word from Sarah that she had found something huge. A document that could change everything. But just as quickly as the hope appeared, it vanished. David was in his apartment, pacing back and forth when the news hit. One of his most trusted allies, C5, had been found dead in police custody. The authorities claimed it was a suicide. But David knew better. He had seen the pattern. It wasn't the first time someone close to him had been silenced. And this time, it was personal. The shock of losing C5 hit him harder than he expected. C5 had been a key ally in his fight. And now that ally was gone. The weight of betrayal, once again, pressed down on him. This death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. A sign that David was no longer playing against just a corrupt corporation. He was up against something much bigger. Something far more dangerous. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The walls were closing in, and the safety net he had been relying on was no more. C5's death was a message from C3, a reminder that no one was untouchable. David couldn't afford to falter now. He had no choice but to push forward, to fight harder than ever before. He couldn't let C5's death be in vain. He had to finish what he started. But the danger was real. The stakes had never been so high. And David knew that the next move could very well be his last. David stood outside the conference room, his hands clenched into fists, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of everything that had happened, the losses, the betrayals, and the shocking death of C5, had driven him to the edge. But now, with everything at stake, there was no turning back. This was it, the final strike. C5's death had been the tipping point. It was a painful reminder of how far C3 was willing to go to maintain control. Yet, David knew he couldn't let it end like that. He had to fight back. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had been hurt by C3's actions. With the help of the few allies he had left, David began organizing his next move. They gathered the crucial evidence, a series of confidential documents, an audio recording, and a video that could expose the truth behind C3's manipulations. The time had come to bring everything into the light. David had a plan to present this evidence before the board, during a public meeting, or even at a court hearing. It was a gamble, but he had no choice. If he succeeded, it would mean the downfall of C3. But if he failed, everything would be lost. He knew the risk, but what other choice did he have? Every moment that passed without exposing the truth felt like a betrayal to the people who had been wronged. And so, with resolve hardening inside him, David took the first steps toward his final confrontation. Just as he was preparing to unveil the evidence, C3 struck back. The first move was swift and cruel. Using their immense financial power and influence, C3 spread false rumors about David. The media was flooded with stories designed to discredit him, to paint him as a liar, a schemer. They attacked his reputation, making the public question his motives and credibility. But C3 didn't stop there. The personal attacks began. David's family was threatened, his closest allies were targeted, and whispers of betrayal filled the air. He was caught in a web of lies and deceit, with no safe place to turn. As the stakes grew higher, David realized that not only was his career on the line, but so were the lives of those he cared about. In the midst of this chaos, David's resolve began to waver. He couldn't shake the feeling that this battle wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had suffered because of C3's grip on the system. His actions, His choices would shape the future for all of them. But just when it seemed like David had reached his breaking point, something unexpected happened. A person whom he had written off as a potential ally reappeared, someone who had been on the sidelines. Someone David thought he couldn't trust. This person, who had quietly observed the fight, now stepped into the spotlight with a crucial piece of evidence. It was a shocking revelation. A video, a recording, and documents that C3 thought they had safely buried came to light. With this evidence in hand, David now had the upper hand. The truth could no longer be hidden. The tables had turned. The impact of this new evidence was immediate. C3's carefully constructed narrative collapsed under the weight of the truth. Their attempts to manipulate the situation faltered. And for the first time in this long battle, it felt like David was finally in control. But the emotions that came with this victory were overwhelming. This wasn't just a personal victory for David, it was a fight for justice. For the truth that had been buried for so long. David's heart raced as he stood before the board. The press, the public. He knew that bringing the truth to light meant personal sacrifices. His reputation was on the line. His safety, his career. But this was bigger than him. This was about breaking the system that had allowed C3 to operate unchecked for so long. As he prepared to speak, his mind flashed back to everything that had led him here, the betrayal, the sacrifice, the countless sleepless nights. Every choice he made now carried weight. Every word, every decision, had the potential to change everything. But despite the fear, the pressure, and the danger, David was resolute. He would not back down. This was the moment of reckoning. The truth would come out. And no matter the cost, he would make sure of it. The day had arrived. After weeks of secrecy and fear, the time for confrontation was now. David stood in the room, facing the board of directors, the media, and the countless eyes that would judge this moment. The evidence was irrefutable. The facts were clear. C3, the person who had orchestrated so much pain and suffering, could no longer hide behind lies. C3 had done everything to maintain the illusion of control. The perfect public persona. The smooth-talking leader with a knack for making everyone believe in their own version of the truth. But now, everything was crumbling. David's revelations, the damning documents, the audio tapes, and the witnesses. Each piece of the puzzle fell into place. And C3 could no longer deny their role in the conspiracy. The walls were closing in. Despite the mounting evidence, C3 was not one to simply concede. They remained defiant, clinging to power with everything they had. This isn't my fault, C3 continued to insist. This is a failure of the system. Not me. If I had known, things would have been different. It's all about the bigger picture. And you? C3's voice wavered slightly. But they quickly recovered, launching an attack on David instead. You've been manipulated, just like the others. Don't let your own vanity fool you into believing you're the hero. But no one was fooled anymore. The carefully crafted image of C3 was falling apart. Thread by thread, the public, the press, and even the board could see the lies now. The people who had once rallied behind C3 were now skeptical. The cracks in their mask visible to all. David's heart pounded in his chest as he stood there, facing his adversary. The weight of the moment was not lost on him. He had come this far, not just for himself, but for everyone who had suffered under C3's reign. The fight had started as something personal, but now it was a fight for justice, for the truth. His voice trembled with emotion, but his words were clear, steady. You've manipulated and hurt so many people for so long. It ends today. The truth is out, and there's no running from it. The room was still. Everyone was waiting, watching. David's eyes locked with C3's, his gaze unflinching. This was the moment where everything changed. But just as it seemed like C3's fall was inevitable, a new twist came to light. A familiar face appeared. A person who had once been a friend. Someone who had quietly slipped out of the picture. Someone David had thought was long gone. They were back, and they were carrying something critical. The final key to unlocking the full extent of the corruption. This person, someone who had long been on the sidelines, seemingly removed from the fight, stepped forward, offering evidence that would completely flip the narrative. They didn't just confirm the things David had said, they added another layer, revealing that C3 wasn't the only one involved. There were others, more powerful figures, who had been behind the scenes pulling strings. The system of corruption wasn't limited to one person, it was a vast network. An entire structure that needed to be dismantled. The revelation hit David hard. He had believed that defeating C3 would be the end of it. But now he understood that the battle was far from over. C3 had been a puppet, one of many in a web of deceit that reached deep into the heart of the organization. He wasn't just fighting against one villain, but an entire system that had protected itself for far too long. David's stomach twisted as he processed the enormity of what he now faced. This was not a simple task of taking down a single corrupt individual. This was the beginning of a larger war, one that would require every ounce of strength, every ally, and every piece of evidence he could gather. It wasn't just about winning a battle, it was about exposing the entire network. No matter the cost, his emotions surged, a mix of anger, fear, and determination. This fight had started as one for personal redemption, but now it was much bigger. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for the truth. He was fighting for everyone who had been crushed under the weight of corruption. David's heart was heavy with the knowledge that this battle wouldn't be over in a single moment. But for the first time in a long time, he felt the hope that justice might finally be within reach. As the room stood silent, the tension in the air thick, David took a step forward. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no turning back. The mask had fallen, but the fight was just beginning. The final blow had been struck. After months of relentless investigation, countless setbacks, and unimaginable personal cost, the truth had finally come to light. C3, the mastermind behind the corruption that had plagued the organization, had been exposed. The damning evidence, once buried under layers of deceit and power, was now undeniable. C3's reign was over. The public had spoken, and the once untouchable leader was now behind bars. Their reputation in ruins. It was a victory, but for David, the protagonist who had tirelessly fought for this moment, the feeling of triumph was bittersweet. As C3 was arrested and dragged through the courts, the damage was done. The consequences of C3's actions had already left scars. Many lives had been ruined, many careers shattered, and the organization itself had been left in shambles. David stood amidst the wreckage of the system he had fought so hard to dismantle. C3's downfall felt necessary, but it wasn't enough. The weight of the truth, however gratifying it was to see justice done, also carried with it the realization that this was just a small victory in a much larger battle. C3 might be gone, but the rot within the system that had been allowed to flourish for so long, still lingered. The fight for justice had to continue. This was just the beginning. As David walked away from the scene of C3's public disgrace, he faced an uncertain future. His decision to fight had come at a high personal cost, but now he had a choice. He could choose to leave the company, to walk away from the corruption and the wreckage that had once been his life. Or, he could stay and attempt to rebuild, to restore the integrity that had been lost, and to make sure that the lessons learned were not forgotten. For a moment, David allowed himself to reflect. His heart ached as he thought about the sacrifices, the betrayals, and the relationships that had been damaged. He had lost so much, but at the same time, he had gained something invaluable. The fight for justice had stripped him down to his core, but it had also made him stronger, more resolute in his belief that truth and justice must prevail. Yet, even as he stood on the precipice of a new chapter, a small detail began to nag at him. The victory felt hollow, incomplete. As he sifted through the documents related to the case, an email caught his eye. It was a small detail, barely noticeable at first, but enough to raise suspicion. The message was cryptic, its sender unknown, but it hinted at something more, a larger plan. A new force that had been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The system had not been dismantled, it had merely shifted. David's breath caught in his throat. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Whoever had sent this message knew something he didn't, and whoever was behind it was more dangerous than C3 ever was. A new enemy, or perhaps an even deeper conspiracy, was looming on the horizon. David realized that his journey wasn't finished. The truth had been uncovered, but there were still so many pieces of the puzzle yet to fall into place. His resolve grew stronger as he processed the implications. The battle had only just begun. C3 was only one part of a much larger system of corruption. And David was not about to stop fighting now. The truth was his weapon, and he would wield it until the very end. But this new revelation, this shadowy figure who remained hidden behind the curtain, was a reminder that even the strongest warriors could not fight forever. David's future remained uncertain. He had fought for justice. Yes, but the price of that victory had been steep. He couldn't help but wonder if, in the end, he had truly won. The system was still out there, waiting, plotting its next move. A call, an unexpected document, a whisper in the shadows. All of it pointed to the same grim reality. The truth was not finished. And neither was David's fight. As he sat back, the weight of the world pressing down on him, David knew one thing for certain: he couldn't turn back now. There was still work to be done, still justice to be served. And this time, the stakes were even higher. In a world where the truth often lies hidden beneath layers of deception, this story serves as a reminder that standing up for what's right can expose the most unexpected truths. It's a testament to the power of awareness and the courage to act when things seem wrong. Have you ever witnessed a situation like this, where the truth was uncovered in the most shocking way? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to Undercover Truths for more real-life stories that bring hidden truths to light. Your support helps us bring more captivating content straight to you. Thank you for watching.